But in Acts 17, Paul uses this idea of what they were calling the unknown God, which really probably has the idea of the God that's unknowable. And they wanted to make sure that this particular God that no one was able to know was also receiving worship. And so Paul uses this unknowable God and says, well, this is how you can know him. And he goes about saying how all the nations of the earth have been united together and that we all have to breathe air. We all come from one bloodline, that there is no separation between people when it comes to being offspring of this God. And this God that you don't believe is knowable because you know that he doesn't dwell with temples that were made with hands. It's not that he needs anything from mankind whatsoever, that he has established boundaries and time limits, and there's a lot that you can know about this unknowable God by the things in which you see, the things which are created. And then he moves from that to introduce into their curiosity Jesus Christ, someone who has been raised from the dead. And we know from that there were some people who mocked and there were others who were wanting to hear more. But Paul uses that so masterfully to talk about this is how we can know what God wants from all of mankind, to not be ignorant, but to know that there is a time period in which we're going to be judged. And we're going to be judged by the one in which this God, who is knowable, has appointed. Our memory verse for this month is Genesis 1 and verse 1. That in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. With 10 simple English words, the Bible begins to unfold the greatest story ever told and the one that will save us in the end. And it does it so masterfully with just 10 simple English words. And so that's what we're going to be looking at this morning. So what I also missed was seeing notebooks. So let me see your notebooks this morning. Hold them up high. Very cool. Okay, your 3 words for this morning are the words order, light, and design. Order and light, we're going to make a point about that at the end of the lesson specifically, because I think when we think about creation, and one of the lessons that we can learn as adults from this is that it's not just a story that we go through with our children to make sure they know the days of creation, what was created on each day, but to emphasize the fact that God is able to unwind all that he created in an orderly fashion, just as he saw fit. And he did it for a very, very specific reason. That when he was able to make light, he didn't need the sun in order to make light. Light was created before the sun was. But God was able to make from the darkness the light to shine. And that is something that we need as well, because this is all according to God's design. That even creation itself was supposed to be teaching us something about who God is. And so this morning we're going to be looking at the God of creation and some of the things we can learn from him. Back in the 70s, maybe even into the 80s, there was a man that some of you probably know, well, I know a lot of you know, named Bob Ross, right? And Bob Ross would take this canvas, this empty canvas, and he would sit there and he would start to paint on that canvas. He'd make happy little trees and happy little clouds and happy little birds in the air. And it was amazing to watch whenever you did see that somebody was able to take such a blank canvas and make something out of that. But he would also every now and then say this, he would make a happy little mistake and he would turn it into something beautiful. And it is amazing to see. When we go to Genesis 1 and verse 1, so if you're turning your Bibles to Genesis 1, verse 1, if you have trouble finding it, it's just the next page after table of contents. But in Genesis 1 and verse 1, we have the unraveling of creation. And as I said, verse 1 is our memory verse for this month. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And too often, these passages are used to combat things like evolution, which it does. Don't get me wrong with that. Because they are scientifically sound, but they're not based on science. And these words, there's no apology and there's no justification. There's no proof that's trying to be given for the existence of God. It just says, in the beginning, God. And when you think about when Genesis was written by Moses, it was written as the children of Israel had seen so many wonders, including the overthrowing of all the so-called gods of Egypt, and the Red Sea being parted, and all these amazing things that God had done. And so Moses spends no time whatsoever in trying to say that God exists. He just says, in the beginning, God. And that word that's used there in that passage, in the beginning, is from one Hebrew word that I will not attempt to pronounce because I've had COVID. But when you think about this Hebrew word that's given, it's one word that means, it's basically the idea of like first fruits, the first and foremost, the pinnacle or the utmost tip. What it literally means for us today, when you think about it in our language, is like the tip of a needle. It is such a precise and exact thing. In the beginning, not in a beginning, not in a story about beginnings, in the beginning, at a very, very specific, precise, undividable, utmost, first fruits, pinnacle, time began. And we know that there's going to be a point in which the Lord returns again and time will end. But in the beginning, God created. It's not the idea that he took things and he made something out of it. If I were to take a piece of paper and fold it up and say to you, look, a computer. Now, I can call it whatever I want to call it. I formed it, I shaped it, I created it. But we know it's not a computer because it doesn't do anything. The word that's used here in Genesis 1, verse 1, in the beginning, God created, means he gave purpose and design and functionality to things. Notice that in verse 1, it says that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then as you go through the rest of the chapter, then he begins to unwind and to put into proper order and perspective the things in which he had created. And so you have Genesis 1 and verse 2, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said. In those first few voices, you see the God of creation who is hovering above his creation, waiting to act, about to give sustenance to all that is there and purpose behind each and everything that is made. And so on the first day, God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he divided the light from the darkness. The God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. Then God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. God made the firmament, divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. So the evening and the morning were the second day. Then God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth. And the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let the earth bring forth grass and herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, the herb that yields seed according to its kind, and the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the third day. Then God said in verse 14, let the lights in the firmament of the heavens divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons, for days and years, and let them be for the lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. Then God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the fourth day. Then God said, let the waters abound with abundance of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens. So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters of the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. So the evening and the morning were the fifth day. Then God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature, according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and beasts of the earth, each according to its kind, and it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And then God, in a conversation with the Spirit and the Son, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Then God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, see, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of the earth, and every tree that whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for food. Also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, to everything that creeps on the earth, in which there is life. I have given every green herb for food, and it was so. Then God saw that everything he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. I appreciate you indulging me as we read through all of Genesis 1, because when you go through that chapter, there are so many things that we see. But again, Genesis 1 is not written from the perspective of giving us an astrophysical analysis of how all of these things were created and the substance that went into formulating all the different cycles of the earth and the animals that were created and the genetic structure of the man that was created. Instead, it gives us the image of the who created. Genesis 1 is not so much about the creation as it is about the creator. And so when we go through Genesis with our young people and we try to teach them and to talk to them about the beauty of Genesis 1, it is about the one who created all these things, that we indeed see his power and his great might, and that he was able to just speak and these things came into existence. In Romans chapter 1 and starting at verse 18, it talks about the wrath of God that's revealed from heaven against all unrighteousness, because there are those who suppress the righteousness of God in their unrighteousness. Because what could be made known of God, because people are without excuse, you can look around you and know that there is a creator who made all of these things, because it's not just that these things exist, but because these things work. That there is not just substance, but there is purpose. And that by seeing those things, you know that there is someone who is a designer of that thing, and not someone who just sporadically or erratically or subjectively just put these things out there just because. But they had very specific purpose and function in working together. And when man forgets that, there's an avalanche of ungodliness that unravels. And that people will give up what is the natural use of the human body that was created as the stamped image of God himself and be steeped in depravity. And that avalanche of ungodliness ends with people even giving approval to those things which others do that deny the very existence of God. Sin is a disease, and it is something that kills, because it is a direct affront against a God who is the creator. And when we forget God being the creator, we lose all purpose in life altogether. So in Psalm 19, verses 1 through 6, if you'll turn there with me, and place a marker there. We'll go back to there in just a moment. But in Psalm 19, verses 1 through 6, here the psalmist attributes so many things to the power and might of God as well. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out throughout all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tabernacle for the sun, which is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoices like a strong man to run its race. Its rising is from one end of the heaven, and its circuit to the other end, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. We see the great might and power of God, and we also see his wisdom In Proverbs 8, verses 22 through 31, it talks about wisdom, and it's a great narrative of the beauty, the virtue, and the great power that's behind wisdom itself. But the way that it does that is by describing wisdom as being an individual that was in counterpart with God, that was there consulting and having counsel with God as all of these different things were created. And so when we talk about wisdom and why it is that we should not just be looking at only commandments that are given, but to be looking for wisdom and guidance when it comes to decisions we make in life, it is that same type of wisdom that God gives in His very character and nature that created the world that we're talking about when we talk about wisdom, and when we talk about discretion, and when we talk about understanding. God is wise. Do we not remember Job 38 through 40, those chapters, where Job has went through all these chapters of trying to figure out, why are these things happening to me? And when God appears on the scene to give answer and tells Job, you can ask me a question, but you stand there like a man first and you answer me. And if you can answer me a few simple questions, then I will allow you to cross-examine me. Where were you when I created these things? When I said to the sea, when I said to the sky, when I said to the great creatures, when I said to these things, let it be so, and it was good, where were you? I didn't consult with you. Could you have consulted with me? Could you have given me advice on these things? Would you have said that there's a better way or a different way? Job was shaken to his core by the knowledge that God was the creator of all things. And because of that, this chaos that was in the midst of Job's life was just like creation at the very beginning, that God was the only one that was going to be able to unravel it. God was the only one that was going to be able to make sense out of it. And it wasn't going to be by questioning God. It wasn't going to be by doubting God. It was going to be by understanding that God was the one who created things. And if you want to have these things in your life unraveled, God was the one you were going to have to trust. If God can say to the light, let there be light, and it was so, and it was good, and it was without any type of accident, God can definitely unravel what's in my life. And He can give purpose to it and meaning to it. If God can give life, He can give life everlasting. So back in Psalm 19, and picking up at verse 7, after it talks about all this creation of God, in verse 7, the law of the Lord is perfect. It turns to God's word, His law, and it is perfect. It's converting what converts the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold, sweeter also than the honey and the honeycomb. Moreover, by them your servant is warned, and in keeping them there is great reward. Who can understand his errors? Cleanse me from secret faults. Keep back your servant from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. Then I shall be blameless, and I shall be innocent of great transgression. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Here's the purpose. In creation, we see Jesus Christ more clearly. In Colossians 1, it's made clear that there was nothing that was made that was not made by Jesus and for Jesus. We see the Godhead present in the very beginning when God said, let us. Because God, the Creator, is there. The Spirit is hovering over the face of the waters. And then the catalyst of all things being made, God spoke. And that's who Jesus is. When we read through Genesis, it is easy to get amazed and astounded at all that was made and how it was made. It's easy for us to look in awe and splendor of who God was. And that original audience who received the first writings of these things, you can imagine what it was like for them to think about God. But these things were written so that we might see Jesus. That just as strong and powerful it was when God said at the beginning, let there be. So strong is the same language when Jesus says, come unto me. So strong is the language when Jesus says, go into all the world. So strong is the language when Jesus tells us of the great love that God had for all of mankind, that he sent his only begotten Son. It is those same words that has so much power and so much wisdom that redeems all of mankind because it gives order to all of the chaos. It gives light in the midst of darkness. And that's what we actually learn from these passages, is that God is able to do that. In Jeremiah 32 and verse 17, Jeremiah, in trying to figure out how's God going to make all this work of all the transgression and iniquity of his people, how's he going to make it work? And he points to the fact that God made all things, and then he says there is nothing impossible for you. How chaotic is your life right now? How chaotic is your soul and your purpose in life? How confused are you by everything that's going on? Understand that when God created all of those things in the beginning, none of those things had power in themselves. None of them things had wisdom in themselves. God did not need the sun for there to be light. He took the light and placed it in the sun so that we can have an image or a symbol of that. But there is no power, there is no wisdom found in any of those things by themselves. So why do we become so up in arms about just the things that are created, by the things that are around us that were made by the voice of God, that were made and put in such a way that they will work and function with one another? But brethren, there are nothing but things, and they're all going to be dissolved. And none of them was for the purpose that we might be shaken, because God created those things. Genesis 1 is about the Creator. God said, "Let there be," and it was good. And you messed it up in chapter 3. And I will make it right again. Here is my Son, the Christ. Listen to him. Jesus himself said, "I am." Before Abraham was, I am. And that was a testimony to the fact that Jesus was there to bring order in the midst of chaos. Brethren, if we go through those types of things, my encouragement to you is to go back to the beginning. How was it in the beginning? God was the Creator, and everything responded to his voice. We don't respond to the things that were created by his voice. We respond to his voice as the voice of our only God. He brought light into the darkness. And it's such a beautiful way in which John begins his gospel account in John 1 that echoes so beautifully the creation itself, but reveals that it truly is about Jesus himself. In John 1, starting at verse 1, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it." In verse 14 it says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth." You read Genesis 1, and that's what John says through the inspiration of the Spirit. You're supposed to now hear. God speaking. And when he's speaking, it's image after image after image of Jesus Christ. Because that's what it is all about. Because God does have a grand purpose in mind. You think about the great seas, the oceans in which God created. And it was lifeless water until God said, "Let there be." And because of what God said, the oceans were filled and teeming and came to life because of God speaking something into the substance of that water. When we think about the waters of baptism, it is nothing more than H2O. It is water. We can give a scientific explanation of what it is. And it means nothing except for this: God spoke life into it. God said, He who believes and is baptized will be saved. And so my faith is not in the substance, the scientific explanation of how something comes together to make water. My faith is in a God who said that he who believes and is baptized will be saved. And so when you go through passages like 2 Corinthians 5, verses 16 through 21, it speaks about how Jesus Christ becomes life and how Jesus is the one who makes all things new. Behold, all things have been made new. You want things to get right in your life? You want things to be not so chaotic anymore? You want there to be a source of light in the midst of your darkness? Listen to God, who said, "Let there be." And after each and every one of those that we read in Genesis 1, and it was so. That's what God's invitation is to you this morning. Let there be. Is that what you need? Let there be. And it will be so because of our great God. If you're subject to the invitation this morning, the question I want to leave with you is, do you need to go back to the beginning? If that's your desire this morning, if that's what you need this morning, if there is any way whatsoever we can help, Genesis 1 is a great place to start, and we can start there with one another and studying God's Word. If you want to be baptized because you believe that God said that if you are baptized, you will be saved, if you trust in that command and are willing to submit this morning, let us help you. As together we stand and sing, please come if we can be of assistance.